I am a student of history, and from a very young age, as a young Haitian woman, history is something that in my household is just really, really upheld, simply because my parents always talked about us being the first Black nation to achieve liberation. And so understanding that, I know with history, I can find my footing, and it gives me the opportunity to say, this is who I am, regardless of everyone else around me, what they say.
My name is Deandra Williams. I am the Adult Program Supervisor at the Boston Public Library. And so it is our honor to have our amazing panel that is here, as well as Dr. Karilyn Crockett, who will be moderating today. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Karilyn Crockett. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you so much, Deandra, for the wonderful welcome, and welcome everyone here to the BPL in the afternoon. It's amazing. It's a beautiful, beautiful day outside, and you have chosen to be in here with us, and you didn't have to, but I'm grateful that you did. So we have some really important things to think about for this afternoon. So welcoming back some of you who are here for the morning session, and welcome afresh to folks who are here for the afternoon. So my name is Karilyn Crockett. I am a professor of urban history, planning and policy at MIT, and I'm also a Dorchester kid. So I come wearing the hat of a resident, wearing the hat of a scholar, wearing the hat of someone who is deeply interested and concerned with the history of school desegregation in our city. And so I'm happy to be here also as co-chair of the Boston Desegregation and Busing Initiative, alongside with Lou Finfer, who I know is in here and ably led us this morning for our morning session. This afternoon, we have an opportunity to talk with you about the legacy of desegregation and busing. Success or failure is the title of this forum. You see our distinguished panel here. I'll introduce them in a minute, but wanted to offer a few comments up at the top. So really, this is not a discussion of success or failure. It's really an opportunity for us to take stock of an incredible multi-generational history that we all inherit, that some of us have been harmed by some of us and some of us still stand in, and all of us have an opportunity to really think through not just the last 50 years or the last 100 years or 200 years or 400 years or 500 years, depending on how you count, but for really thinking about the next bunch of years ahead. This is a generational story that is important to tell, that is important to try to get right. Many of you know that when BDBI as an idea, as an initiative, as a working group was started, it was really Lou Finfer trying to think about how to commemorate not only 50 years of a story, but how can we do a better job of getting that story right? How can we think about the lessons learned, and how can we think about what to do now? And so there has been a matter before us of corrective actions. When these forums kicked off about a year ago in September in RCC, we really started what has been now a 3-year process of engaging in a broad and wide civic dialogue across the city with people who were involved in the classrooms, people who were students who were on the bus, people who were in City Hall, people who were parents, who were elsewhere, who were teachers. And so this really is the spirit of a town hall meeting that is here. But as some of you may know, I myself have been deeply ambivalent, actually, about how to commemorate this story and whether or not, in fact, we should, in many ways. What does it mean to commemorate 50 years of something that did not work? Or what does it mean to really take stock of what we have learned and how we have learned to do better? That doesn't quite seem right. How we have learned to say the students had to do it, they needed to be on the buses, that doesn't seem quite right or fair to them. But how can we take a moment to look very hard and very long in the mirror about what we can do next? I wonder in my heart if it's possible to recover from what feels like a state of constant forgetting. Yep. This year we mark the 50th anniversary of a decision and the 50 years since the yellow school buses carried students across the city into a fiery crisis. 40 years ago, there was a story to be had. 50 years today, there was a 40th commemoration that was had. There was also a 30th commemoration that was had. Talking and listening, but in many ways throwing up our hands and saying it could have all been so different. Yet there is truly nothing we can do, we often say, in the face of so much history. So much damn history. So much damn history that is incredibly damning. In 2034, will we convene here again in Robb Lecture Hall to mark the 60th year of the day that the buses rolled? As we mark this anniversary, or this moment, our hope and our intention has been to offer another way of thinking about this history, a broader way, a more corrected way, and to really be honest with what that will mean, not just in 2024, but certainly for 2025. And so I also want to think about, or share with you just a few of my thoughts about what it is that we can remember or hold on to. I have 4 points. One is that in 1964, there was still a fight about whether or not racism in fact existed. That was the major focus of the debate. Before we could even get into a conversation about the quality of education, or whether or not students should get to school on a bus or not, the fight around whether or not racism existed, whether it was de jure or de facto, wrapped everyone in a fight. That was the major focus of debate, discussion, and controversy. And for many of us here today, that may seem almost unthinkable, but this was the debate, and the refusal to speak truth to it was what is the legacy that we carry with us now. No one was willing to take legal responsibility for the quality of education in Boston public schools or the constitutional right of Black children to have access to it. Without the Education Committee of the NAACP and its muscle and its perseverance, we would not be here today marking or reflecting on this decision at all. The NAACP led the civil action case that Judge Garrity responded to. It was the NAACP's leadership, legal brilliance, and tenacious organizing against all odds is what we need to remember and to lift up and celebrate again and again and again. Earlier this morning, Joe Feaster, himself a part of this incredible legacy of the NAACP, lifted up some of this story for us, along with the leadership of Tom Atkins. I know that Charlotte Nelson is also in the building here, and then later, our work has also been represented by Michael Curry, and then today's NAACP leadership represented by Tanisha Sullivan. So these freedom fighters and countless parents, families, mothers, grandmothers like mine who stood with Tallulah Morgan, who refused to allow inaction and racist inaction to win the day. The other learning for me here is the importance of understanding and thinking about the reality of the Racial Imbalance Act. That this history did not come out of the blue, it did not just happen, that there were laws on the books that we refused to heed, that were refused to be heeded by the Boston School Committee and our political leaders. The 1965-19 Racial Imbalance Act really is a central reading for understanding this history and trying to understand the tensions and what is still at stake. For anyone who wants to get into the nitty-gritty of what we have been learning and what we have been hearing this last year, I promise that I invite you to take a look more closely at the Racial Imbalance Act itself. The fact that it's not over, the fight to get racial balance, the extent to which anti-Black racial hierarchies continue to organize the social, economic, and political life of our city, is rooted in understanding some of this act, at least in the 20th century. The 1965 Racial Imbalance Act was signed into law and called for an annual racial census of the public schools and demanded that where there is non-white enrollment of 50%, of over 50%, the local school committee must take steps to end the imbalance or lose state aid. So this is the crux of some of the issue that had to do with the fight and the intransigence of the school committee and its unwillingness to heed and make real racial balance. What's important here to note for us is that in the Racial Imbalance Act itself, there was no mention of busing as a vehicle, as a corrective. It was still a conversation around what we could do without the notion of busing, and yet the school committee would not heed. And so this story is important for us over and over again because it is the inaction of so many political leaders that left our children in harm's way. It's crucial for understanding the leadership and advocacy of parents pushing for justice in the schools. Also, the 1968 Bilingual Education Act was really important for providing funding for bilingual education programs and legally affirming the use of languages other than English in the classroom, and paved the way for language justice that we continue to fight today. And my last lesson here, taking a liberty here to share, is this word of busing itself. The word busing continues to be a problem, even in the name of this initiative, called out because of its importance in this historical fight, but problematic because of the ways that busing itself is a slur in many ways and a distortion of an ongoing fight for freedom and civil rights, and the importance of trying to correct and call that out as we enter into this conversation that I know our panelists will lead us in and through. The Garrity decision is important in so many ways. We commemorated that this year, June 21st, because it was the first case to involve a state-level Department of Education in monitoring compliance. It also was the first time a parent or citizen group was given the authority to monitor, and never before had the quality of education been combined as an objective with desegregating a school system. So that's something to let us know why this decision was important and what it meant, but also that the demands of people on the ground, and certainly the demands of the NAACP at the time, need to have our full attention and commitment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to briefly read some of those 14 demands from the NAACP from 1963, which are really instructive here. And then I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves and start us into a bit of a conversation, but wanting to bring some of that into the room with us. The 14 points that were submitted to the Boston School Committee by the NAACP are these. This is that famous meeting where folks went in with Ruth Batson of the Education Committee and were shut down and refused conversation and refused the actual meeting. Number one, that the school committee make an immediate public acknowledgement of the existence of de facto segregation in the Boston school system. Number two, an immediate review of the open enrollment plan to allow transfers without present limitations. This plan is to be put into operation by school opening in September. Number three, in-service training program for principals and teachers in the area of human relations. Number four, the establishing of a liaison between the school administration and colleges so that training programs may be set up for prospective teachers in urban communities. Number five, the assignment of permanent teachers to grades 1 through 3 and the reduction of these classes to 25. The reduction of these classes to 25. Number six, the use of books and other visual aids that include illustrations of people of all races. Number seven, the establishment of a concentrated developmental reading program in each school in grades 1 through 8. Number eight, the expansion of the school adjustment counselor program in the congested Negro school districts. Number nine, the expansion of the vocational guidance program to include grade 7 and the selection of qualified unbiased counselors. Number 10, the elimination of discrimination in the hiring and assigning of teachers. Number 11, an investigation into reasons as to why Boston has no Negro principal. Number 12, a review of the system of intelligence testing. Number 13, the adoption in total of the Sargent report that refers to Roxbury and North Dorchester. Number 14, our most important proposal is as follows. We seek the right to discuss the selection of a new superintendent. So these were the bases of conversation, of negotiation, of agitation. There is no mention of busing in any of these demands. And so I felt like it was important to just recenter us in what was on what was at stake, and really want to appreciate and acknowledge the archivist at Northeastern University who's made so many of these documents available to us. I see that Jordana Marcagni is in the audience, as well as Molly Brown. And so looking at the archive to give us witness, to give us center, and to let us know what is important. And so for this afternoon, we have an opportunity, again, to think about how do we take stock of this incredible history, but also these demands for a set of fights that are still ongoing and unfolding. Right here to my right, I have an incredible array of experts, of freedom fighters, of folks who are educators and witnesses and also bearers of the word on what we need to do now and what is at stake. And so directly to my right is Jessica Philippe. Many of you know Jessica because she is also the coordinator of BDBI, but in addition, Jessica is a mother to 4 beautiful children in the Boston Public Schools, ranging from elementary to high school. She's active in schools and also in organizing in hopes of continuing the work of our forefathers and mothers. She comes from a solid and long line of community healers and practitioners and looks to live up to that legacy, which you absolutely are. Next to Jessica is Dr. Raul Fernandez. Dr. Fernandez is a senior lecturer at Boston University, where he studies, writes, and teaches about inequities in education, and is the executive director for Brookline for Racial Justice and Equity. He rallies his neighbors in the relentless pursuit of racial justice through this work. He's been named Impact Scholar for the Initiative on Cities, and is a Massachusetts Education Policy Fellow, is named by the Rennie Center for Education Research and Policy. Dr. Fernandez is also the chair of the statewide Racial Imbalance Advisory Council, and co-authored the Racial Segregation in Massachusetts Schools, the first report in a generation to evidence the substantial disparities between segregated white and non-white schools in Massachusetts. Really happy to have Raul, Dr. Fernandez with us. Next to Dr. Fernandez is Layla Hood. Layla is now a senior at Lexington High School. I want to give it up to recognize the senior because today is a big study and work day. So Layla, thank you for coming away from some of your studies to be with us. Layla is a senior at Lexington High through the METCO program, where she has been a student since kindergarten. She also helps run an education program for METCO that teaches about this important history of racial desegregation in schools, and will talk to us a little bit about that. She's worked with METCO to lead tours in Nubian Square related to the history of METCO, but also the larger racial justice organizing history for the city. Her big hope is to make a contribution that will help another child. Thank you, Layla, and welcome. Yes, and next to Layla is Barbara Fields. Barbara Fields, for many of us here in this room, needs no introduction, but I'll attempt to give her one. It says that she is a retired Boston Public School teacher, Boston Public School administrator, but if any of you know Barbara, she is not retired in the least. And she also worked in the district's Office of Equity, which she led from 1981 to 2007. She was a member of the Black Educators Alliance of Massachusetts, or BEAM, as you know, and is a founding member of the Boston Network for Black Student Achievement. Barbara attended the Timothy and JP High School, so knows a little bit about something from being inside the schools. Welcome to you, Barbara. And then right next to Barbara at the end is a friend to many of us here as well, Michael Patrick McDonald. Many of you know from his important and prize-winning book, All Souls, prize-winning in my heart for sure. A family story from Southie. Michael works on trauma issues in Boston neighborhoods in Northern Ireland. This book, All Souls, that many of us know and have read, is a New York Times bestseller. Michael grew up in South Boston's housing projects, which held the highest concentration of white poverty in the US. After losing 4 siblings and seeing his generation decimated by crime, addiction, and incarceration, he became a leading Boston organizer, helping to launch many anti-violence initiatives, including gun buyback programs and support networks for survivors, all with the explicit goal of building multiracial, class-conscious coalitions of solidarity. He continues to work internationally with survivor families, educators, and organizers, using his trauma-informed restorative justice curriculum, The Rest of the Story. Michael is also a professor of the practice at Northeastern's Honors Department, where he teaches nonfiction writing and social justice issues, as well as a course abroad studying peace building in the north of Ireland through a decolonial lens. And so please join me in welcoming Michael and the entire panel. Thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over and join you all. And the way that we have set this up is the panelists will respond to a few questions that I have. We're hoping to have a little bit of a conversation, and then we can open it up to you for some questions so we can have, again, a dialogue and an exchange. Because some of the questions that were related to this panel started in the morning, I feel like you're warmed up a little bit, so I look forward to the conversation. So let's get into it. How are you guys? You feeling good?
Good.
Yeah. And how are you guys out there? You can hear us okay? We're good? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as I mentioned, just getting us started, that this is an opportunity for the audience really to hear from all of you in terms of what it is about this longer history of school desegregation that has been important to you, for you and your work, and just giving you an opportunity to introduce yourselves more fully to our audience. Would love to welcome you into conversation. And so, Barbara, maybe we'll start with you, since I can see you under the microphone there. Can we pull that down?
They don't realize there are short people.
We are height diverse in this group, and so let's kind of give an assist to the microphone there. You can actually pull that out, too.
Oh, you can take
That help you?
Yeah, that might be better. It's like being in the supermarket when you can't reach the products on the shelves.
You get it.
it for you. There it is.
And Judith
Thank
is
you.
here keeping time for us, which we appreciate. And so, keep your eye on her because she's keeping her eye on us.
Okay.
So, Barbara, tell us who you are and how it is that this history has been informing your work.
Well, I'll begin by sort of reading my notes, since I tend to be long-winded, and I won't know when 3 or 4 minutes are before me. I'll think that, I've only been talking for a minute or two, so I'm going to read it so I can abide by the rules. So, as you know, my name is Barbara Fields. I have basically spent the majority of my life in Boston Public Schools. I attended as a student in grades 5 through 12. And when I first came to Boston, I was introduced to the Boston Public Schools by being in class in the 5th grade and being summoned to the office. And when I went to the office, the principal informed me that I was using the wrong name. All my life, up until the 5th grade, I was Barbara Somerville. When I came to Boston, of course, you have to give your birth certificate as you enter school. So instead of speaking to my mom about it, I was called down to the office and told that my name was not Barbara Somerville, my name was Barbara Fields. So that was very traumatic for me, being a young student, but that was the introduction, and that was a level of respect that was paid to my family, my mom, and to me at that time. So after attending college, I became an elementary teacher for 9 years before moving into central administration, serving as the head of the Office of Equity for 24 years before retiring in 2007 after a total of 34 years. During my years in the Office of Equity, one of my responsibilities was monitoring the implementation of the Federal District Court order on staff desegregation. I was also responsible for receiving, investigating, and responding to complaints and matters pertaining to discrimination and educational equity and access. I served reporting directly to and advising 10 superintendents during that tenure. Based on my official roles in the district and my personal experience attending as a student as well as a parent, grandparent of 2 children in BPS, I can say that desegregation and busing, and I share your sentiments about calling it busing, but I won't go into that right now, has been important to me and my work. The lens through which I have seen the 50 years of this history paints a vivid picture of the failures and successes if we are to be honest about our collective experience. The greatest failure of this era is that those in leadership at the time, the elected officials, the Boston School Committee, the Boston School Department, and the State Board of Education did not have the courage, the will, nor the desire to prevent, address, or even care to acknowledge the discrimination and inequities brought to them by Black parents. Instead, Black parents and the community were disrespected, ignored, and forced to seek other means of securing an education for their children, including filing a suit in federal district court that was assigned to W. Arthur Garrity, who has been historically maligned for his role in using desegregation of the schools via busing as a means of addressing the discrimination. Our children should not have been subjected to the violence that was promoted by the adults in the city. For you see, the order wasn't really about having a Black child just sit beside a white child. It was really about giving Black students a quality education by having equal access to the resources throughout the city of Boston. The success of the desegregation effort was that Judge Garrity issued over 400 orders covering areas of fairness and student assignment. What school did you go to? Staff diversity, school facilities, the condition of the buildings in which different kids went to school, student safety, parent involvement, student discipline, how students were disciplined, and the disparities that were evident in that, partnerships with colleges and universities, entrance to exam schools, advanced work classes, bilingual education, transportation, and many, many others. It opened up opportunities and access within Boston Public Schools for Black students that had been denied to them and which their parents had been fighting for many, many years.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. You can clap. It's okay. And so maybe, Layla, I'll give you a shot at the same question, sort of thinking about the history itself and who you are, letting the audience know who you are, and also want to highlight the fact that you are also an educator at this table as well as being a student. Absolutely.
So hello, everybody. My name's Layla Hood, and I'm a senior at Lexington High School. And I have been in MECO since I was in kindergarten. So I get, well, now my mom actually works in Lexington now, so she drives me with MECO. But
Mom.
She's right there. Say hi. But I used to wake up and get on the bus every morning and go 45 minutes minimum, probably, to get to school, and then 45 minutes back. Probably more usually if there's traffic. But I would be on the bus and I would read my books. I would read about everything, and that's where I found a love for education and learning. It really helped me throughout my school career. While I enjoy being a MECO student in Lexington, sometimes I wish I didn't have to go as far for school. I wish I could go to the school that's around the corner from my house, you know? But working with MECO, I've been exposed to a lot of opportunities. I lead the Nubian Square tours. It's one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I've learned so much about the history of MECO, and not only the history of MECO, but the history of education in Boston, most of which I did not learn in school at all. So it was very eye-opening. I was probably in shock for the first day that we started learning about it and watching videos, because I didn't know, honestly. It wasn't taught to me. So learning about it, I was like, oh, more people should hear about this. You know, more people should know about the history of MECO, especially my fellow MECO students. So I enjoy that job. And then another interest that I enjoy is I enjoy music. I love music. I want to go into music therapy because I think music can touch people in so many different ways. But back to the question, for the history of desegregation, I think that, you know, as more people are becoming aware of this, and that then we can make change. I feel like a lot of it's like watered down a lot in school systems. Like, I've never had a black teacher at all since kindergarten to now, and I'm about to graduate. So, you know, and I think if more people were just aware of these little things, that could really help different students.
Thank you. Thanks, Layla. You can clap as well. She just introduced herself. That's great. And Raul, would love to call you into the conversation to share a little bit about who you are and how this history has affected your work and path.
Sure thing. Thank you. Also, no, you're usually the panelist, and here you are the moderator, because you have so much to share. But thank you for taking this on and bringing us all together. So, you know, my story starts in the late 70s and through the 80s. I grew up in El Barrio in Spanish Harlem in New York, and later on lived in the South Bronx, 2 segregated Latino neighborhoods, under-resourced communities as we call them today. When I grew up, we called them poor. But we now understand also that it isn't just about the income of the folks living there, but about the investment or disinvestment of communities like the ones that I grew up in. You know, I went to my typical round-the-way school, which was, we call neighborhood schools, right? The one that was closest to where I lived, and it was typical in all the ways that we see in under-resourced communities. When I was 4 years old, just 4, there was a teacher named Miss Friedlander who had to make a decision. She had to decide who amongst the kids in her class she was going to recommend for this talented and gifted program. Okay? Y'all been around 4-year-olds? I don't know. I'm an educator. Don't ask me to pick, right? You know, deciding at that age which kids have the promise and should be showered with resources, and which kids should be left in typically unresourced communities and neighborhoods is wrong. It's absolutely wrong, and it misunderstands the promise that all kids have, the potential that all kids have. And so really thinking about that experience, being selected for that program, which puts me into later on these exam middle schools like Manhattan East, and then Bronx Science, and ultimately to BU, which is what brought me here to Boston. And I started thinking back more recently about the road not taken, the path not traveled. And whereas Bronx Science, for instance, routinely graduates 99 to 100% of the students that go there, I would have gone, my zone school at the time would have been Stevenson High School in the Bronx, Steve-O. And Steve-O at the time was graduating 30% of the students that went there. That's 3 in 10 kids graduating high school, never mind going on places like BU. And so really, my work has been centered on the idea that different opportunities lead to different outcomes. And then whenever we see on that back half of the equation these different outcomes based on factors that should not dictate how well someone is either doing on standardized test scores or is flourishing in other ways, we see these different outcomes, we have to look at the front side of that equation, which is what the opportunities they had were in the first place. And when we look at, we'll get into this a bit more, but when we look at who has most access to opportunity and who has the least access, that dividing line is certainly around socioeconomic status, and it's also, it was then, it still is today, about race. And so that's what brings me to this work. I also served for the last 6 years on this Racial Imbalance Advisory Council. In the last year, we produced this report when I was chair. I'm now termed out, so I can't serve anymore, but would if I could. And what we saw over, those 6 years was in educational infrastructure, a bureaucracy that seems very uninterested in tackling this issue. They've got their own ideas about the issues they want to address, but this idea around segregation and this gap, this huge yawning gap between what white students typically have access to and what kids of color, especially black and brown students, typically have access to, I've seen a real lack of interest in addressing that at the statewide level, and I think that has repercussions in Boston and beyond. So I'm going to stop there for now. I got lots more to say. I'm looking forward to hearing from my fellow panelists too.
No,
Thanks.
that's great. Thanks. Yes. Thank you. And Mike, I'd love to pop over to you and then come back to the end of the table here with Jessica, but just kind of letting you have an opportunity to introduce yourself and reflect on the history a little bit.
Sure. My name is Michael Patrick McDonald, and I was 8 years old in 1974. I was living in Oak Colony Project in a family of 11 kids, like a lot of neighbors in poverty. The lower end of South Boston, which included the 3 large housing projects as well as the housing around those housing projects, was found to have the highest concentration of white poverty in America. In 1974, when the busing plan started, both Roxbury and South Boston were named death zones by social scientists for their infant mortality rates. And so I grew up in this place. Nobody talked about the poverty of the place. Nobody talked about the crime. Nobody talked about the violence because we lived under a strict code of silence. Whitey Bulger, who everyone knows about, enforced that. It was just the culture we grew up in. And as a kid, witnessing the violence of that time and the racism, and then coming of age in a place where so many people were dying from violence and substance use and suicides and domestic violence, murders, and infant mortality, coming to the awareness that we have a lot in common statistically with the people who we were told were our enemies. And so the legacy really that it had for me, there's 2 legacies I think about. There's the legacy on a whole generation of South Boston teenagers and young adults who were wiped out. And now I work a lot with their children and grandchildren, so there's a generational trauma around that. I'm going to read a quick paragraph just to introduce that whole notion. I've been doing a lot of readings for the 25th anniversary of All Souls, and I returned to this, which is at my sister Kathy's coma bedside. I lost 4 siblings to the effects of poverty, but one sister who's alive to this day, severely brain damaged. She was in a coma for 5 months after being pushed off the roof in a fight over pills. And this all was happening in the years after 74, when both the busing plan started as well as when Whitey Bulger came to full ascendancy. And right-wing demagogues in our neighborhood basically enforced a boycott, and nobody was going to school in those days and people dropped out. So that equation is very strong to me, that the dropout rates that began in those years led to people jumping into the arms of Whitey Bulger for any opportunity they might have, the bank robberies and so forth, and leading to a whole bloodbath in the following years. Now this is alongside my belief that the desegregation order in June of '74 was, of course, a good order, the right thing to do, way overdue, of course. We were way behind in that. And that is to distinguish that from the busing remedy that was used, again, which was not part of the demands initially. And I have to say that in 1999, I was on a panel like this with Ruth Batson, Julian Houston, Judge Julian Houston. Judge Garrity was supposed to be there. He was not well at the time. And one of the things that Ruth Batson said that day to me and to the audience, and that she said publicly a few times, she said, when we got to Southie High and we saw kids sitting on floors and plaster falling from the ceiling and so forth, just like ours, I said, this is not what we meant. I looked around and I said, this is not what we meant. So that was really striking to me. The things people didn't know about this neighborhood, particularly the people who made it part of phase one, pitting Roxbury and Southie against each other for equally shitty schools. What people didn't know is about the neighborhood having the highest concentration of white poverty in America, South Boston High School having the most students on welfare citywide. Also about, in terms of the funding, the resources, the average white student in Boston was getting $450 per student, average black student, $250. That's a huge problem. South Boston students were getting even less, according to Ken Guskett, the former president of the NAACP, because he also lamented that this was used as the place to pretend to be getting equity. Within a year, Kathy took her first steps, at first with a walker, then with a cane. She dragged her right side when she walked. Before long, she was dragging her right side all around O'Colony Project to all her old haunts. But more and more, her walks were up to Jackie O'Brien's funeral parlor to attend her friends' wakes. More and more often, I found myself sitting at the window, noticing how clean-cut all the teenagers in the neighborhood looked, with ties on and wet hair slicked back like Catholic school kids, gathering out on Patterson Way for the 3-block journey up Dorchester Street to a funeral parlor. You wouldn't even recognize some of the rougher ones among them. Kathy, Kevin, and Frankie put on their best clothes, too. Kathy usually followed at the back of the crowd with a few others who walked with canes or were wheeled in chairs. It was becoming another one of our Southie traditions, these groups of spiffed up kids gathering to see their friends in a casket. And Ma found herself wondering which one would be next. When Kathy was in a coma, she was visited by a lot of her friends, none of whom went to school. They had all dropped out in those years. And when I was writing the coma scenes, each person I was writing about visiting her also had a demise within a year or two. So it made me realize, writing that scene, how that whole generation was impacted in those years. So the legacy it has for me these days is to, I just devote my whole life, I always have, always will, toward building coalitions of multiracial solidarity, class conscious as well. Doing both, race and class, always, not one at the expense of the other, ever, and never to have this as a kind of contest, but to, as the Combahee River Collective talked about from Boston, to see it as interlocking oppressions and to see the work as interdependent solidarity and liberation. Thank you.
And Jessica, how about you? Bring in an organizer perspective, but also a parent perspective to the conversation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Phillip. I use pronouns she, hers, and it is deeply humbling to be sitting at this table with such dynamic folks, and just to be able to share a little bit about what this means for me. Like Dr. Crockett previously said, I currently have 4 children in Boston Public Schools, in 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 5th grade, and I have a senior. So I've been in BPS for quite some time. We've kind of left and come back, and along the way I've learned some incredible things and not some good things, but thankfully with resources and privilege, I was able to avoid a lot of what my neighbors could not avoid. Being here today, there's like a sense of calmness that comes knowing that the folks who were here prior to me even being able to sit at this table, the amount of sacrifice and work and effort that they put just for us to be in this room, and to be visionaries in a sense where you're living in a time where you're not welcomed, you're facing just abject poverty and brutality at every turn, but still there's something inside of you that knows that the future could be different. And so I really want to make sure that I take the time to honor them, folks that have passed on and were not able to witness this room right here, but those who are still present, because it's not that long ago. And I just think about the honor of sharing space with so many folks now, especially Ms. Charlotte Nelson. I'm not sure if she's still here, who has been a pioneer in this for a really long time. When I think about what draws me here is I am a student of history, and from a very young age, as a young Haitian woman, history is something that in my household is just really, really upheld, simply because my parents always talked about us being the first Black nation to achieve liberation. And so understanding that, I know with history, I can find my footing, and it gives me the opportunity to say, this is who I am, regardless of everyone else around me, what they say. As a parent in the Boston Public School, and also as I work for the city, there are times where it was really challenging, but I made the commitment of keeping the kids in BPS because I cannot ask other residents and other folks to go through something that I personally do not have a stake in. And unfortunately, that has not always been the practice and in the past, which could have contributed to the downward spiral of our school system now. But I definitely wanted to stand firm on the fact that if we were going to work on this, then we were going to have to feel it personally within our own spaces. Just even thinking about now, my oldest, when he first went to kindergarten, K1 at the Mather Elementary, we were living in Adams Street, and Kenny School is right behind us. But he was not assigned to the Kenny School. He was assigned to the Mather, who is by Bowdoin, Geneva. So we had to figure out a way to get there. And then my now 5th grader, when he got assigned to kindergarten, he was put in for the Tynan. And we live in Grove Hall. And so that was like a 30 to 40 minute trek for a 5-year-old to go to school. And the Tynan is a beautiful space. And a part of me really wanted him to be there, but we passed about 4 to 5 schools on the way there. And so that was in 2019, how now we're still facing the remnants of this de facto segregation and how it has seeped into the depths of our system. And unfortunately, because a lot of us do not carry the history and understand the work and the evil that accompanied it, we kind of keep perpetuating and repeating the same very thing. And so that's why, really learning and getting into the history of desegregation and the times and learning new things now and kind of building on things that we know before, it's so critical if we're going to, I don't want to be back here again for the 60th anniversary, just having the same conversations.
And can you have one of is it your son or your daughter who's at the Ruth Batson?
Oh,
yes. You have to say that, please share.
Yeah, and the thing about timing is just so beautiful, like the way that life just falls into place. My oldest actually is going to be the inaugural graduating class of Ruth Batson Academy. We just did the naming. We had a ceremony just like 2 days ago where Ruth Batson's daughter and grandchildren were present. And for me to be a part of this work, while my oldest gets to take space and be in a building that not only carries the name Ruth Batson, but the excellence that she herself was really pushing for Black children to have access to.
And so Ruth Batson's name has already come out here, and certainly with METCO, understanding the founding of METCO and Ruth Batson's leadership there, along with Jean McGuire, what it means to have Layla here as sort of representing that history, but also METCO's relationship to a school committee that was very eager to think about ways that Boston didn't have to act. And so on the one side, there is this conversation about our regional response to integration, which can be a good thing, but we know that is not a good thing if that means the city of Boston is shirking its responsibility to bring racial equity into the classroom. And so wanting to just highlight kind of Ruth's name and the fact that there's so much of that work that's already ringing out here. Wonderful. So you can see all of the reasons why I was so excited to bring these panelists together, because we have a set of folks who have been deeply rooted in these histories, but also trying to understand what that means for now. And so as we have shared some of these stories this morning and over the course of the year, I did mention earlier that there has been an effort to sort of correct some of these histories and get some things right. And in your comments, each of you have shared a little bit of your sense of the gap or the missing narrative. And so I was wondering if you might share your thoughts about something that you feel like we're still missing when we tell this story, and any other lessons learned. So what are we missing that we need to make sure to lift up today before we turn into solutions in terms of what we can do? What are some things that we should still be thinking about? And Michael, I'd love to turn to you first and maybe get started and then come on down and around.
Well, I mentioned it a little bit, the lack of class involved in the conversation. Reverend Barber has just written a really good book. He's the head of the Poor People's Campaign in the United States and wrote a book about white poverty. He's a black man writing a book about white poverty, and he said that he wrote it because, to promote this notion that we need to build class-conscious solidarity movements. In raw numbers, most people who are poor are white, and they don't vote. And he's trying to say that, there's an assumption, of course, that they're the people voting for Trump. And but what's been proven is that those pockets of extreme white poverty around the country, we're not talking about working to middle class like the people showing up at the rallies, they do not vote. And he's talking about the opportunity there, but also the opportunity of building class-conscious, multiracial coalitions. In my experience, it's not that difficult. In Boston, I've been involved in those since the 90s. I started doing it by reaching out to survivors of homicide victims who were from Charlestown, who were white Irish-American mothers whose kids had been murdered in Charlestown. There was organizing happening in Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Black and Latino mothers whose kids were murdered. And when I started working with those groups and introducing them to each other, they immediately saw their sisterhood, and the solidarity was just powerful. And that was never that never came with any kind of tiptoeing around racism. These movements were as anti-racist as they were class conscious. And eventually we got to Southie, an even harder nut to crack than Charlestown in those days. And again, the same thing. It was black moms from Roxbury and the Charlestown Irish-American mothers who helped me start the vigils in Southie, and those sisterhoods were incredible. These were all my surrogate mothers from around the city. But when you reach people, where they've had difficult lived experience and where they want to transform that trauma into their voice, into their purpose, when you reach people in those places, that's when you build grassroots movements. I think that, one of the unfortunate things about 74 with the busing remedy in particular was that there were some kind of top-down attempts at doing that, and it just never works top-down. You have to do it bottom-up, and the best way to work bottom-up grassroots is to reach people where the pain is, and where the pain isn't going away, but there are a whole lot of people that want to transform that pain and turn it into purpose. So that's just
Powerful.
What really inspires everything I do.
Yeah, no, it's great. Thank you for that. Yes. That is an invitation for us to think about how to catalyze sort of what we're learning, and as you were saying, turning pain into power. And so that transformational act is where I believe we're standing. Layla, I'd love to turn to you now, because again, you are someone who's been teaching these stories to young people, to other audiences, and is there something you feel like is missing in terms of how we tell the story and then what we should do with that?
Something I think that is missing, it's obvious, but I think we just forget about it sometimes, is how the history of redlining plays into education in Boston.
Yeah.
So For those of you who don't know, the banks, they would literally get a map, draw lines on the map, and then the green and blue areas, this is where the white people are going to live. These are safe areas. These are areas with resources. And then, like, literally in the bylaws, it was like, you cannot sell black people houses. You can't give them loans for houses in these areas. And, like, it was literally written there. It's just crazy. It's, like, outright racist. And then you have the yellow and red areas, and those are the areas where they put black and brown families, and those families that were under-resourced, it was, they labeled it as dangerous areas. And of course that plays into the education of, a child. Like, not only are you, like, you're trying to learn, but you don't have the resources you need, and it really, now they don't have the money going into their schools, and it's not fair. It's really not fair. But Ruth Batson, I really admire her because a lot of people don't know that she was actually a nurse. Like, she did not go to school to be a community organizer or none of that. Like, she was just a nurse, and she was like, why is this like, the kids, my neighbors, they went to the other school, the white school, and she was like, why do they have science fairs and my kids don't, And she was like, that's not fair, so I'm gonna do something about it. So I admire her for that, and how she went up to Louise Day Hicks and she was like, we're gonna do something about it, although she got rejected many times. Like, they canceled the meeting when they seen the word segregation, which also is, like, not fair, But she started Operation Exodus in 1965. So this is when just regular parents, like, they would bring their kids to the whites, because there was, like, a loophole in the system. They were like, if there's a seat for your kid, you can bring them, but you got to find a way to get them there. So black and brown families would bring their kids to these white schools, and once the principals started noticing, they literally went in and took the desks away. So I thought, I didn't know that, I wish I learned about that. And it's really not fair to the kids. Like, now, not only, like, I've been in an experience where, actually, like, a couple weeks ago, I was like, wow, I'm the only black kid in this room. But imagine, like, being the first only black kid in a room, during that time period. I feel like it really affects a child, and I think, like, you have to really think about the child. The child's going through a culture shock. The child, this is all new. Not only is it new for the black child, it's new for the white child. And when you have adult agendas being pushed on children, it's hard for them to focus on learning and, growing emotionally. It's difficult for them. And I've experienced that firsthand between me and my peers.
Thank you. So I'm going to pivot now. Thank you. Yes. I want to get you in on this, Barbara, but want to recognize just the importance of having us think about infrastructure and investments. Is there economic patterns in the history of redlining, as you point out, Layla, so important in trying to tell the story of individual actors and people like Ruth Batson and like you who's sharing the story, but also what are the other kind of forces that were organizing and affecting our city at that time is a great point. Thank you for that. Barbara, how about you?
I would say, I think...
Let's get you on the mic. Should we get your mic? Sorry.
I would say, I think, a real critical point, tying into the whole issue of resources, is that during that time, and again, we've said that this really was about access to opportunities and resources. And then when we look at what was happening during that time and what our children were denied, and she's even talking about our community was denied, or the ramifications of decisions being made, is the real, if we do not have the advocacy, if our communities are not deeply informed about what is going on, that saying, knowledge is power. Yes. If you don't have that knowledge and that power, then often you don't know what you're being denied, or you don't know what you need to do to get what others have, that you also should have access to. And thank God for those who came before us, the Ruth Batsons and others of the world, of the city. They had a sense of that, and so they were able to provide that leadership. When I look back at the infrastructure, and I even look at Boston Public Schools now, I see the infrastructure that is taking place now is reverting back to the infrastructure that was in place then and is being reestablished. But people nowadays don't seem to know that history. And so that's one reason it's really important that we're having these sessions. I sat here and I thought I knew just about everything about, the DSEG, because I was so involved in it at the time through BEAM and through, just being a part of that whole civil rights movement. And today I've learned some things about that I did not know, and I wish I had known. And so when I think about the fact that back in the beginning of DSEG, we didn't have hardly any black teachers, a very small number, even in terms of administrators. And the judge put in an order that said you must achieve and maintain at least 25% black teachers. Now remember this order, this suit was filed by black parents, so the language really is addressing the case that they brought forth, but it also helped many others too, and in some ways, all the kids in the system. And it said that you must have at least 10% other teachers of color, which was Asian, Latino, and who am I leaving out? I'm sorry.
Families
Asian. No, I said Asians, Latinos.
and immigrants, immigrant families.
He didn't really say indigenous at that time. Since I monitored this for 30 years, I can't believe I'm not remembering the other. But anyway, when we look at the percentages now of black teachers in the district, we're in non-compliance with that 25% number of black teachers. And BEAM and the NAACP right now is engaged in possibly an upcoming lawsuit around the fact that it's been 20 years since we reached the percentage. At one point, we got to 26%. And the point I'm leading to is if you don't have the advocacy, if you don't have people knowing what's going on, and if you don't have the will or the commitment to doing right by kids and communities, as soon as the court backs away, as soon as the advocacy is no longer there all the time, you slide right back into those old habits. Because one thing that I'll say, and my dear friend Hubie Jones and all that he has done for us, one thing he said this morning that I kind of disagree with, and he was talking about racism. And I guess trying to be very positive about it, but he said, and I wrote it down so I didn't misquote him, about racism not being here anymore or something like that. And it's like, from where I sit, still dealing with BPS in a very active role all the time. I've forgotten that I retired because I'm still dealing with the things that I, in fact, monitored when I was in the district. And that's how we got to fulfill the court's order of at least 25. We had 26%. As soon as they took the sign off, it's called sign off authority. I used to sign off on every single personnel paper. So if it wasn't moving toward the order, then I wouldn't sign. And the superintendent, I was very fortunate, would agree with me and would not let the paper go forth. So we were able to reach that 26%. But as soon as those provisions were taken away, and there was no advocacy on a day-to-day basis for it, we're slipping back. So we're seeing ourselves go back in so many of the areas in which we were moving forward. But now it means that we have got to become much more active, and we can't let our eyes get off the prize because we are slowly, unfortunately, slipping back. So I'll stop there because I could go on about the student assignment plan and why our schools are getting resegregated. I could go on and talk about.
Now, I'm going to have Raul say something about that. So that's a perfect segue for him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And then we're going to open this up. Yeah. So, Raul, can you do that? Can you give us a little bit of your state?
I think quickly, but I will happily cede some more of my time to Barbara Fields. Do you want to say, finish that thought, and then I'll pick it up?
It's connected.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I was basically, saying that we have to be vigilant Because right now, and we don't need to go backwards. Not to use somebody else's saying, we are not going back. Well, we are not going back, so we have to be vigilant. And he, in his report that he did, I was so happy that it was done because I used to be on the Racial Imbalance Advisory Council, from which he served as the president and put that report together. And it had not been done before. So I'm going to turn it back over to you because that really gives a documentation that we need to say, hey, we're not going back.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
then we're going to open it up. So if you have questions and things that you want to share, please be thinking about those and get ready. But want to hear from Raul from that statewide perspective too. Whatever you have to say.
And I'll do what I can. Let me just start by saying on the historical piece is that there's a racist idea that is propagated today by the right, but which I think also lives in the minds of the left, which is that black and brown families don't value education in the same way that other families do. When we look at the actual history, yes, and the actual history shows us the opposite of that, right? It shows us that there were over 5,000 schools created across the South during a time when black families were denied an education for which they paid taxes, but were still not able to access public education in these Rosenwald schools, created by Julius Rosenwald, one of the founders of Sears and Roebuck, along with Booker T. Washington, but funded by black families, created their own schools. So that's the extent to which these families valued education, when locked out of what they had rightfully deserved, created their own anyway because they wanted it. And they know they needed it. So this idea, we've heard this, including when we were working through the Racial Imbalance Advisory Council, that there's something, well, you got to understand, these kids and the kinds of schools we're talking about, or these families aren't as invested, and that there's been this disinvestment, this flight from, let's say, BPS, has left a district full of families who aren't as invested in their education, and we called bullshit on that. That's not right. That's not true. When you believe that, then you absolve yourself from any responsibility to do anything about what's wrong, right? Sorry, we got all these kids, all these English language learners, students with disabilities, high need students. We lump them all together, and we say, well, of course we're not going to be able to do as well. And the outcomes are going to be poorer than at schools that don't have that many students. When you blame it on the kids and families, you're already lost. And so we approach this from the perspective that it ain't the kids and it ain't the families. We got to really see what's going on in these districts in particular, and it's really about resourcing what's available and what's not. What we found was a dramatically segregated state system, right? Now, you cannot fault, let's say, Lawrence, for instance, in terms of the actual number of students, right? For having a 95+% Latino school district when 95+% of the people in Lawrence are Latino, right? That's what you're naturally going to get. But what we see when you look at communities like Lawrence and communities just across the border are dramatically different experiences and also outcomes. Remember that story at the beginning? Opportunities and outcomes. We see dramatically different experiences and outcomes. And we were able in that report, which I hope you get a chance to check out, it's 47 pages, but there's like a 5-page executive summary. Be able to check it out is we showed across every single metric, the higher the concentration of kids of color, particularly of the highest, sort of the most intensely segregated schools, 65% of those students are Latino, 25% are black. And so also rethinking in our minds what segregation looks like in Massachusetts is critical. But in those schools, the higher the concentration of kids of color, the poorer the results on every single observable metric that DESE has in terms of educational outcomes. Now, are they measuring all the outcomes that need to be measured? Absolutely not. Right? And we know, and we went into this work understanding that there are schools where predominantly kids of color are that are doing things better than schools that are much whiter. We see this, by the way, with a growing migrant population in Massachusetts and suburban, overwhelmingly white districts saying, can we please get some help from the urban districts understanding how to support English language learners and migrants in our, because we're not used to that, right? So we know that urban districts do things that are better as well, even though on some of these observable metrics, they're faring much poorer. So I'll take one more moment. I got the stop sign already from Julia. I'm going to take one more moment, just to say, and we're going to talk about what to do about these things. But just to say, when you view a problem as unfortunate but to be expected, which is, again, that racist idea that lives in our mind. This is, oh man, look at these data, that's unfortunate, but no one's really surprised by it, are they? Right? When you view a problem as unfortunate but to be expected, it leads you to one course of action, which is usually inaction. But when you view a problem as unacceptable and solvable, it leads you to another course of action, even more so when you view it as your responsibility. And so part of this work is making sure that the folks in this room are tuned into this, but does the commissioner view this as his responsibility? I would argue no, not right now he doesn't. Does the superintendent? I'm not really sure about that either. Does the governor? I don't think so. Right? How do we make sure that those folks feel that it is their responsibility to step in here? And there's a lot more folks that are tuned in more with BPS. You can call those folks out by name if you like. But that's part of the job too, is making sure people feel like not just that this can be fixed, but it's their responsibility to do so.
Thank you. Yep. So we want to take a few minutes to open it up for questions. We'll take a few and then see what we get. A lot of what we're trying to think about now is what to do, right? What does this mean? It's sort of a bunch of what Raul just shared, and certainly this sort of snapshot into where are we now. In a moment, we're in the city of Boston. We know that we're losing school-age population. We're losing students in the schools. Even if we account for in-district charters and parochial and private schools, we are still, as a city overall, losing students who are in the schools, all the school systems. What does that say about what does it mean in terms of affordability in the city? We also have seen the data from MCAS showing us that 40,000 more students are underperforming on MCAS. However you feel about MCAS, the message today is we're not doing well. And so what can we do about that, and what messaging might we want to send out to the superintendent, to the governor, to the mayor? Happy to hear from you and take your question.
Karilyn,
Questions?
can I jump in really
Yeah,
quick, too?
please.
This is something that when everyone was talking, this is a quote that I carry with me. It's from Audre Lorde that says that you cannot use the master's tool to dismantle this house. And when we talk about like where's the gap and what's missing, it's literally we're living and using the same exact things that by design is holding us from being able to achieve what we're trying to achieve. And so until we have that like deep commitment to say we're going to find other ways to do this, not through this institutionalized deep racism that has been formed by land-owning white men, like from the Declaration of Independence, it will continue to keep poor white men and poor black families and Asian families separated simply because that's the design of it, for us to all just be in different spaces and not recognizing that the very thing we're all asking for is quality education for our children, regardless of where we live, where we look, and all the other things. And so like the gap I feel like is we're still trying to dismantle with the master's tools.
Okay, so an invitation to critique and also to be radical in our creative approaches. Okay, great, let's open it up. Thanks, Jessica. Questions? I saw some hands already, so let's hear from you. And please, let's make sure we hear a question, which is fantastic in advance.
My name is Marcy Merningham, and I worked with Superintendent Bob Wood when he came in as the quote-unquote reform superintendent after Marion Fahey in 1978, 46 years ago. And I worked on the DSEG case. I was in the court. I was responsible for the reorganization. Our job was to reach the affirmative action goals on the staff side. We did it. I did my doctoral dissertation on the consent decree process. So my question is, It builds off of what Layla, is that your name?
Yeah.
No, not late. Well, but you all made reference to it in different ways, and also I think the panel this morning did too. What are the kind of new structures or institutional relationships that might be considered to address the shortcomings, not just in schooling, but in housing, poverty, a whole bunch of other quote-unquote equity issues, health equity, transit equity, et cetera? And the question is rooted in two places that I think afford a kind of scaffolding for thinking about how to rethink this in terms of both the money power and the people power.
Okay.
The first is the 1975 decision, which is the real Garrity decision. The 74 decision was not the judges, it was basically to the school committee, do what the state told you to do. The 75 order had all of the pillars that were mentioned earlier that might still be used as a template for thinking about where we are with regard to facilities, staffing, safety, security, parent involvement, and
So
especially
Marcy,
parents.
I want to make sure I hear the first part
The
of your
first question, the
structural
question is a structure
Yeah.
building on the 75 order and also the consent decree process, because the agreements that were reached, and I share Barbara Field's concern about the backsliding.
Yeah.
There has been backsliding. So using the consent decree process and the 75 order as a basis, what might be the vehicles for a reconsideration of a different set of institutions and relationships to address these overlapping issues?
Okay, thank you. Let's take a couple. And so Marcy is asking this question about sort of structural responses, even if we're not all totally familiar with all of the particularities of the consent decree, but just wanting to give you all space to answer a structural question. Let's take another couple questions so we can hear them at once and then field.
Are you able to hear me? Okay, fine. Use my classroom voice. The young man who's seated all the way to the left, if I didn't teach you, I certainly taught some of your siblings. I came in the system in '74, and I taught at South Boston High School from '77 to '87, started at Hyde Park High School.
Can you say your name?
My name is Marcia Smith.
Okay.
And the young lady in the middle, would say about you, congratulations on getting ready to graduate.
Thank you.
But I also feel a degree of sadness when I see you, because my daughter was the second class to enter Metco with Ruth Batson. She went to Newton. I think Lincoln was the first town that had Metco. And 50 years later, we still need Metco. And that feels very, not very good. One issue, though, to raise a question for the panel, especially the older ones, the union, the role the union has played in maintaining or the influence it's had on the system. I resent it so badly the first 15, maybe 10 years I was in the system, that my union dues were taken to take the case all the way to the United States Supreme Court to overturn Garrity's order.
Right.
I think that what's happening now in terms of the backsliding, I think there is a role, a more positive role for the union to play.
Okay, so let's give our panelists a chance to respond. Thank you both for these questions. And so people want to know what to do. That's the question. What is your guidance or a structural response? There's a point here around if the union may have a role, but Barbara, you've obviously hit a chord with folks on this notion of backsliding and what we can do to right ourselves. So do you want to lean in here?
Yes, I think I think what I see is a real problem, and we haven't really talked about it in any detail, is the issue that the city of Boston is still embedded in racism. Boston Public Schools has policies and procedures around all different kinds of things. Not that they're all the right policies, but when it comes to race, there are policies that are in place that they're not adhered to. And so when we talk about any of the structures that should be in place or any of that, we're not dealing with how much race plays a role in it. Boston, in order to try to deal with some of the racism, it now has a policy that was put in place around the racial equity planning tool. and it was to keep the district from taking care of certain communities and not others, of engaging in creating certain policies that did not work for all communities. And so there's this process that the district is supposed to go through in order to approve any policies, in order of looking at the Green New Deal student assignment plan, in terms of all these things that Gary put in place to say what they could do and couldn't, but of course the Gary's order, with the exception of staffing, is no longer in place. And so what happens is when these either policies are being implemented or the plans, in comes the issue around racism. So I think that one thing that would help in terms of structure that Marcy mentioned is we need an elected school committee. Now, it may be that the committee that we had before, some time ago, wasn't doing right by everybody. But it seemed to me that when we got Black members on the school committee, and I had to attend every single school committee meeting for 24 years. So I know what happens at the school committee meetings. And because I reported directly to the superintendents, I was also in executive session. She talked about the union. When we did the BTU negotiation sessions, I was in that as a member of the school district's team. So I know the racism, I know the fights that we had to get the school committee to do what it was supposed to do. So I think if we don't deal with the issue of racism, and if we don't deal with enforcing the policies and all of those that are in place, and the union, everybody blamed the union for the issues around desegregation of staff. Well, I was in there, and I was the one pushing the affirmative action because that was a part of my role in those days. It wasn't always the union, it was the school committee negotiating team when Paul Parks was there. So that's why I wanted to write instead of saying it, because I can give you a history of what the reality of all this was because I was there. And so unless we deal with the racism, until we get a school committee that's not a rubber stamp now for the mayor, but you as constituents can go to them and hold them accountable and exercise some power, we're going to continue to get policies, we're going to continue to get plans that take care of the students who are valued the most in the district and the communities that have as the kids would say, that juice. And they don't go to the school committee to ask for what they want, they go directly to the mayor. So the school committee is told what to do, and then when the vote is taken, even though they may ask questions, that the communities who come before them during public comment and speak and beg and plead and all of that, they listen. When it comes down to a vote, it's a unanimous vote. And those of us who are still crazy enough to go to every school committee, John Mudd up there and some other people in here, and speak all the time, and you still get the same results. And it's not in terms of equity, and it's not dealing with the whole issue of discrimination that we can see. So I would encourage people to be a little nuts too. Watch some of those school committee meetings, and then watch some of the city council meetings, and see what happens at that level and why it is that we're sliding back into a segregated city, a segregated school department, and those who have the political juice are the ones taken care of, and not our Black and brown and poor children.
So on that point, please give it up for this panel, this incredible panel that has shared their thoughts, their reflections with us. We have now slid our way into a working strategy session, which is essentially what our hope was for today, that we would be able to end a conversation that would have given us a chance to think way back into this past, into this kind of ongoing legacy and movement toward racial equity, toward educational excellence, and what's going to get us closer there. And I appreciate how the panelists have really taken their personal stories, some of their career, life's work, but also given us some sense of what those steps could be. What could that look like tactically, whether it's thinking about the school committee being reconfigured in some way, whether it's thinking about what it means at the neighborhood level, what it looks like at the statewide level, and that it puts all of us on the hook for this. I know that when we were coming together for thinking about the panel and thinking about actually today, we wanted to be able to give people who were in the room an opportunity to share your recommendations, your advice, your suggestions for, as I mentioned, the superintendent, the mayor, or parents. And so I know we have some index cards that Jessica's doing double duty now and bringing those through. And so if folks want to be able to, if you want to leave a thought, or an idea or a recommendation, we have a way to capture those because the work of BDBI continues forward even after today. So Lou, I know you're going to come up and chat with us, but please another hand for our panelists. Thank you so much. So in no way is this the end, although we've had you, a bunch of you in this room for a while since this morning today. But in many ways, because this work is a multi-year effort, this is sort of the beginning of a bunch of steps that we look forward to taking with you. So thank you again, and thank you, Lou. Great. You want this?
Yes. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Karilyn, for moderating and what you shared. And Carolyn's mother was one of the 14 adult plaintiffs, grandmother in Tallulah Morgan versus James Hennigan, that became the decision on Boston desegregation. So give it up again, Karilyn, and the panel again, please. Just want to touch to recognize you. We do have some next steps. We have a forum, October 19th. Layla mentioned redlining. October 19th, we're going to be doing a walking tour of redlining and blockbusting in Dorchester and Mattapan, and how that also connected to the Boston school desegregation case based on what happened with that redlining and blockbusting. January 25th, circling again to Layla and her experience, we're going to be doing a panel with METCO on the history of METCO, how it was formed, what it's doing today, and also on the history of suburban resistance to desegregation, through policies of banks, realtors, and local government. So those are set. There are groups talking about planning a forum on Latinos and desegregation, a forum on media coverage and desegregation, a neighborhood forum on what happened in East Boston during desegregation and since. We're started to work with Boston Public Schools about how they're teaching this and how they could do more teaching of this to more students. And also with UMass educators, there's going to be on November 18th a forum on the teaching of this history for both high school teachers and for college teachers. So those are some of the things. And then we're trying to, if you can believe it, how do we do these things? We're going to be buying a school bus, a yellow school bus, and making it into a museum. And we're going to try to capture the exhibit that some of you saw on the next floor up, put in the museum with some video screens so teachers could request, I want the busing museum to come to my school, and students could come outside and have a mini field trip through that history. And then the last thing that Karilyn's led us into and the panel led us into is what do we need to do today? And we're going to somehow try to find a way to be another oar in the water with other groups to try to row toward that goal of the kind of education all our kids should have and don't have, and all our kids should have. So thanks everyone for coming today. And also I'm supposed to mention the GBH has been an incredible partner, but they also, let's hear it for GBH. They also have done the technical work to record this forum, and the American Experience, the Busing Battleground, is their documentary, and we saw it this morning, clips that they supplied, so we could show some of that, and we're pleased to partner with them. And then also they have some StoryCorps listening posts that are upstairs that you can connect to further connect to this history. So we want to thank GBH for that. And then again, what Karilyn and all the panelists got into is the what next for BPS. That's our theme. Lessons learned, what happened, lessons learned, and what next. So we got to start on that, but there's more to come, and people working on that around the city. And also I want to recognize this woman, double duty, parent, coordinator, Jiska Philippe. I want to recognize her.
And I would like to recognize Deandra, Kristen, and Jay over at BPL that have been so incredible. They have really gone above and beyond to welcome us on a Saturday morning. So thank you all so much. And if you all don't mind standing up just to please acknowledge our co-chairs, Lou Finfer and Dr. Karilyn Crockett. They put so much effort and work into this to really make sure this stays up. And so I want to make sure they feel like, we appreciate them.